Accountability and transparency have been themes you have already heard a few times on the show, and a lot of times that accountability only comes through the legal system. We want to spend some time now on what exactly that looks like and what folks are talking about when they mention qualified immunity. I'd like to welcome Peter Simonson from the ACLU of New Mexico, Marshall Ray, an attorney here in town, and also Alfred Mathewson, Professor Emeritus at UNM Law School. Now, Marshall, let me start with you. The state legislature this year approved the creation of a Civil Rights Commission, as we all know, to, among other things, look at the issue of qualified immunity. What exactly is qualified immunity, and what should the layperson know about it?
Qualified immunity is a defense to certain lawsuits brought against persons acting under color of state law, usually law enforcement officers. If I, as an individual, feel that a law enforcement officer or other person acting under color of state law has violated my constitutional rights or my rights under federal law, I can sue them and try to get damages or some other relief. And they have a defense called qualified immunity. And the gist of it is that if they can show that they acted reasonably under the circumstances from an objective viewpoint, then you lose the lawsuit, and not only do you not get to recover anything from them, but you can't even move forward with the suit. You can't get discovery, you can't take depositions, you can't learn more about your case to try to develop what really happened.
You know, I think that would surprise most folks. And Peter, the ACLU, you pushed for changes to qualified immunity during the same session we're talking about, but the governor didn't put it on her call. Do you expect a bill to be in the upcoming session? And if so, what will it be seeking?
Well, of course, the governor did actually approve of a memorial going forward that would create the commission that you mentioned before. So, you know, by the end of the year, we're going to have some recommendations from this commission, which, by the way, just involves some of the best minds in our state on constitutional law. And I think their recommendations, I'm hoping, will go forward in the form of some sort of legislation that the legislature would consider in its 2021 session. And, qualified, we're talking about qualified immunity. I think it's important to point out that this bill, assuming one would come out of their recommendations, wouldn't get rid of qualified immunity per se. That is a federal legal doctrine. What it would actually do is it would create the same ability to sue under our state's constitution, the same very analogous rights provisions that we have in the federal constitution, and seek the kinds of damages and relief that Mr. Ray was talking about, but under our state constitution. Mm-hmm. That's very critical. We as a civil rights organization file civil rights lawsuits all the time in federal court, and we lose many of those lawsuits on qualified immunity, even when there are clearly justified grounds for suing somebody for rights violations, law enforcement officers and other government actors on First Amendment issues, on due process issues, whatever it might be. So this gives the residents of New Mexico their own Civil Rights Act, just like the Federal Civil Rights Act, to be able to sue under our state constitution and get some sort of a redemption for the rights violations that they've experienced.
Mm-hmm. Alfred Mathewson, are you aware of any police departments around the country that are on board with getting rid of qualified immunity at this point?
I'm not aware of any.
Yeah.
Peter might know more, but I'm not aware of any.
How do we work on getting buy-in in Albuquerque, here in Albuquerque?
Well, I think that I don't know that we will get police buy-in for it. Just looking at what's happening here, just process-wise, things have been happening for a long time. There is a system that's deeply entrenched. Mm-hmm. The officers are a part of it, and if you have a legal regime that protects you from suit, why would you agree to one that was going to make it easier to sue you?
Right. Do we have a feel, Alfred, on where the public is on this? I mean, do we have public demand, and how, your sense of how much is there?
I think there's a lot there, but I think the public is split.
Okay.
And which way the majority go, but there are a lot of very loud voices that are pushing for an end to qualified immunity, or a reform of qualified immunity. And there's some surprising voices. This is not necessarily limited to Black Lives Matter or others that you see in the street.
Marshall, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, just quickly, I just wanted to make one point related to what Alfred was saying, and that is that, one of the objections that people bring up to getting rid of qualified immunity in some way or skirting around it is that it would put police officers in the position of representing themselves in lawsuits. That is absolutely false. There is no reality to that. The great majority, literally 99% or more of civil rights cases brought against law enforcement officers are indemnified by their departments. Their legal fees are paid for in that civil litigation by the department. So we expect to see that argument come up in opposition to this kind of legislation, but it is a red herring.
That's important. I'm glad you got that in there. Marshall Ray, another important point from another point of view, we hear a lot that officers feel like they'd be afraid of every decision they make if they will, in essence, be paralyzed to act. I mean, how do we balance this idea of accountability, but allowing, officers to do their job without living in constant fear of suits? Is there a middle ground here?
Well, certainly there is. And it goes back to what Mr. Simonson is saying. These proposed reforms, they're not trying to eliminate qualified immunity. They're trying to make it a more reasonable approach, because right now, what qualified immunity means in a practical sense is that if there is not some almost identical factual precedent where a court has said that's a constitutional violation, then you can't recover on that constitutional violation, even if the court believes that you experienced a constitutional violation. They'll say, yeah, this was a constitutional violation, but we've never heard another court say this is a constitutional violation in this factual scenario, so therefore you can't sue. What if we could just reform, even as a modest step, if you could reform the qualified immunity concept so that you don't have a defense that it never happened before, so I get a pass, I get a mulligan. If you violated a constitutional right, then you violated a right, and you should be accountable.
Interesting point there. Alfred Malthusson, interesting when you think about how much money Albuquerque's paid out over the years in civil suits and things like that. I'm just curious where this all fits into that whole sort of area, is if you can't get restitution using qualified immunity, are there other ways for the public to still be able to bring suit or get some kind of restitution after things happen?
Well, there are lawsuits, but again, this process, the system in terms of how it's entrenched. So qualified immunity, you are talking about suits against the officer, but there are also lawsuits against the city in connection with these cases. And there's a different regime for the lawsuits against the city. And you settlements. So that so between the two lawsuits between officers where you don't get qualified immunity and the city when they are liable, cases settle. And actually, I think the public would be surprised at how much municipalities are paying out around the country in settling cases. New York pays about $100 million a year.
Wow.
Settle cases. Chicago pays a lot. LA pays a lot. And even in Albuquerque, I haven't seen the numbers lately, but Albuquerque pays out a lot. This is coming from the taxpayers. Right. And this goes to, in terms of where I would stand on qualified immunity, you can count me in the camp. I would eliminate it because I think we need major transformation, and simply reforming just becomes another incremental change. And to really get accountability and shake things up. Think of what happens if when the officers do have to think about those decisions, but it doesn't start when they get into the situation. It starts when they first leave to embark on a call. They are planning a tactical incident. It starts there. I mean, if you look at the Breonna Taylor case, it didn't start when they got to the department. They just go in violently before they got there. And so it will change the thinking about how you stage operations if there's going to be accountability.
Peter, pick up on that if you would, on Alfred's point there. That's an interesting track there about this changing of behavior when there is the legitimate, threat of suit out there.
Yeah, well, in my opinion, I think changing the qualified immunity doctrine or creating an alternative ways for our rights to actually be not just rights on paper, but rights that are truly actualized in the law is just one ingredient in a whole constellation of different things that I think need to happen if we're going to see a dramatic change in the patterns of police violence that we've seen, particularly practiced against communities of color around the country and here in New Mexico, or against folks that suffer from mental illness. Qualified immunity is one ingredient, but the use of body-worn cameras is another mechanism for accountability. Changing the way officers think about use of force and using de-escalation as a way of reducing the use of force, reducing the number of officers who are actually armed, and maybe actually transferring some responsibilities for interactions with the public to non-armed, non-uniformed positions that are maybe more skilled in dealing with social kinds of issues like mental health issues or substance abuse. All those things need to work in concert. Qualified immunity, in my view, and getting some sort of reparation for that concept is just one ingredient.
Yeah. Marshal Ray, is this a leadership issue? I mean, who can actually push this forward in a singular fashion? Is it a chief of police, a mayor, a governor? Who can actually turn the dial on this and make it happen?
I would think that it's a combination of police agencies. I think police union would need to be involved in the discussion. But I do want to add something to what Mr. Simonson said. And I believe that one of the struggles that we have is transparency in what happens in a particular use of force or particular incident involving a state or a person acting under color of state law and an individual. Right now, because part of the qualified immunity defense is that you can't investigate your claim by doing discovery and you can't get evidence, that there is a major opportunity for agencies to circle the wagons, so to speak, and prevent you from learning what happened, and initiatives that help towards gathering evidence. For example, the camera requirement that will now apply to all law enforcement agencies in the state of New Mexico will help. But then the ability, probably. Professor Mathewson.
Marshall, I do need a favor. We are gonna tackle that one specifically in another show.
Sure.
But I do need to wrap this up. My fault.
Sure.
I mean, we could talk about this for a long time. So Marshal Ray, Peter Simonson, and Alfred Malthusson, thank you guys very much. Really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.